It repeals 3 public financing programs and in doing so ends a unique North Carolina experiment in democracy where people counted more than money. It repeals disclosure requirements under candidate-specific communications. It weakens disclosure requirements for electioneering communications. It ends pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds. It eliminates same-day voter registration. It slices 7 days off of early voting. It eliminates straight party voting, and a voter now can be challenged by anyone in the county who doesn't like them. Just hours after the United States Supreme Court decided Shelby County, gutting the 1965 Voting Rights Act requirement for certain states and local governments to get pre-clearance, the majority made clear they would pursue a far broader set of voting changes in the state, changes that include this laundry list of restrictions, the likes of which we have not seen in decades. The proposed policy solutions of this bill are directed towards problems that either haven't been substantiated by a modicum of evidence or have been manufactured to scare the public into accepting egregious limits on the most sacred construct of democracy, the vote. And what problems do we as a legislature solve when we turn away the poor and the elderly and the disabled and the college student from polling places because they do not have an approved photo ID, despite the fact that everyone at the polling place knows who they are and can vouch for them? And what problems do we solve when we effectively issue a poll tax on individuals who have to pay $24 to obtain a copy of their birth certificate to get their photo ID? And what problem do we solve for the single working mother who can only find time to vote at her polling place after she gets off work on a Saturday afternoon? And what problem do we solve for the new resident of our state who shows up for same-day registration only to be told, not here, not in North Carolina, maybe you can vote the next time? And what service are we attempting to render to young constituents of our state when we not only bar their use of valid student IDs for verification at the polls, but we eliminate pre-registration and mandatory voting registration drives in high school? Well, if these provisions don't solve problems, they will surely create them. For you are telling the next generation in very clear terms, their voices don't matter, their participation doesn't count. The majority could have chosen a very different path, one that Republicans and Democrats have for several decades, as Representative Michaux said, chosen increasing polling sites, increasing access to voter registration, reducing absentee ballot restrictions, extending times to vote, but the majority will have none of that tonight. So down one road we could have gone: more access, more opportunity, more people voting. Down the other, less access, less opportunity, less people voting. If you didn't know who was going to vote in your mind or thought who was going to vote Republican or Democrat, which road would you have preferred? But better yet, which road do you think the public prefers? And if the majority can strip the minority of rights simply by resorting to fear, the foundations of democracy are undermined. No label, no 10-second soundbite, no voter fraud boogeyman can obscure the import of what the majority does here tonight. The New York Times a number of months ago wrote, quote, "Discrimination at the ballot box continues and it grows. It just comes in more forms than it did half a century ago. But it is no less pernicious. Instead of literacy tests, we have rigid ID requirements. Instead of poll taxes, we have bans or limits on early vote. And instead of open opportunity, we have groups descending on minorities who vote at polls, checking registration rolls for spelling errors. And so now, although we don't have what happened 50 years ago, we have second-generation barriers, and this bill is chock full of them. Whatever the political gains or losses, the dangers to democracy arising from voter suppression and intimidation are always greater than the dangers resulting from increased access and opportunity and freedom. For decades in North Carolina, we have been about expanding democracy. Today, the Republican majority narrows it. Lyndon Johnson, when he was president and the Voting Rights Act was coming up, said the following: "The vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by man for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison men because they are different than other men. But nights like this reinforce the fight for equality of man still persists. We all have a stake in democracy and promises being kept. Tonight, my colleagues, you break promise with the past and present and future generations of North Carolinians. If the United States awarded medals for voter suppression, this bill would be a candidate for the gold. For regardless of its aim, the result tonight may well be to cripple the ability of minority and young voters to participate. You present the bill as an hygienic electoral reform measure, but the pathogens you seek to remove are people: African Americans, Latinos, young voters, and low-income folks who simply resist voting Republican. Make no mistake tonight, for those of us who have worked very hard this session with the majority to try to cast a middle ground on so many issues, our anger tonight is palpable. Passage of this bill is a political call to arms, and I believe the majority has seriously miscalculated tonight and will rue the day this bill was ever conceived. Abraham Lincoln said it best: "You may deceive all the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you cannot deceive all of the people all of the time." Earlier this afternoon, the Attorney General of the United States issued a notice that the United States government will use every other provision of the Voting Rights Act to sue North Carolina if this bill is passed. It appears he will soon have his opportunity. Tonight, the majority ambushes the people of North Carolina, and instead of writing a bill protecting their interests, it simply writes one protecting its own.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wake, Representative Hall, rise?